But we did come from Chicago. Dr. Ball, some time ago, came to us. He knew that we had some connections with conservatories and people that understood high-end classical music and instruments. He brought us a very beautiful, very old violin, but with an amazing story. He asked that we could use our contacts to verify its authenticity. And although it did not check out as we had kind of hoped financially perhaps that it could support the Creation Museum and other ministries, but it is, and Dayspring, but it is a authentic, in other words, the story is authentic, the age is authentic, and that's really the value here. God doesn't want us to just have millions of dollars, Dr. Ball, because then we won't be as close to Him, I think. We rely on the Lord at Dayspring and the Creation Museum pretty much month to month. You know, that's just how, but that's a wonderful thing too, because it keeps you close to the Lord, doesn't it? When you rely on the Lord month to month like that, day to day is better. How about moment by moment? That's the best. So this expert gave us his opinion on it, and I didn't feel comfortable with sending it any other way but personally bringing it. We have a small airplane. So we flew in here, private plane, personally carried this violin so that on this occasion it could be entered into display and dedicated as part of a memorial to God's people. The story is amazing. Dr. Ball is going to give you the story, but it'll break your heart when you hear the story too. But it does show, even despite of man's wickedness and heinous acts, that God still does keep His promises. Dr. Ball, would you come as we bring back to you authenticated, beautiful violin with an amazing story.
Thank you, Pastor Scudder. I'm going to need you to assist me here. What a wonderful message. What a wonderful moment. Actually, this entire event of the music, they left their 100-voice choir, 70-piece orchestra, global ministry. All of these men are on the platform in the functioning of that great church that is one of the greatest churches in the history of the United States, and I say that unabashedly, without exaggeration. They left that, and the concert and everything was centered around his personally carrying this private plane from Chicagoland back to the Creation Evidence Museum. It has never been on display anywhere else in the world. When we acquired it, it was in the personal archives of the individual I will now describe. The year was 1940. Haman from the Old Testament was met by Hitler of modern times. The Jews are very special. Both Haman and Hitler attempted to wipe them and their memory from the face of the globe. God set apart the Jews for three reasons. Selected them not because they deserved it, and as the grace message this afternoon emphasized, neither do we deserve anything of God's goodness. But God set them apart to display to the nations historically and permanently the blessedness of serving the true God. It is good to know God. He set them apart to produce the Scriptures. I would never know what was in the heart and mind of Pastor Jim Scudder if he didn't talk. I could only guess. We have no idea about the marvelous resources, eternal dimensions of the Creator God unless He talks. And He did. He wrote a book. So God used the Jews to write down the words of God, that book. Number three, God set apart the Jews to produce according to the flesh Yeshua HaMashiach, God's Son in the flesh, the Messiah. Jesus Christ. And they've done that. And because of that, they've been despised. The year was 1940. The Netherlands and most of Europe had been overrun by the SS Waffen Nazi forces, Hitler orchestrating all of this. In the Netherlands, a little boy, about 7 years of age, John van der Broek, a little boy and his mom and dad were isolated like all of their neighbors. The only building in the small community down the street was occupied by the SS Waffen. They demanded that no one go out of their houses. They couldn't plant gardens for sustenance. They intended, as did Haman, that they would literally starve to death. They were not permitted to go into the forest and collect wood. They couldn't gather anything. 5 long years passed. Little John was now barely 12. Skin and bones. So were his parents, skin and bones. Like all of the neighbors. At night, over those 5 years, in the spring and summertime, they would slip out the back door, clip grass and weeds, bring them inside in order to boil them so they could eat them. They had to take down the frames of the doors, and then the doors. And over the course of time, John described, I met him personally, as an old man. John described how they took the wallpaper, they pulled it down piece by piece, boiled it, and between the paper and the paste, they found something to eat. He was barely 12 when his father said, we're starving, go down the street and get something. John said, I'll never forget, I stepped out the door, down the steps, and I looked back once. There was my old dad. And I said, Dad, they'll probably kill me. And his father said, son, we have no choice. Find us something to eat. And he told me that the only door that was left was the front door. Inside, no doors, no frames. It had been slowly removed, every last one of them, for fire in the winter. Nothing was left in the home, not a piece of wallpaper, not the paste behind it. Nothing but their pallets in one corner. He went down the street to the building. Little did he know, little do we know, the providence of God. That very day, the SS Waffen Nazi forces had heard that Eisenhower had landed at Normandy. And they vacated the area. Little John strolled down the street not knowing what his fate was. Went to the one large administration, old building, walked through the door and there was no one there. He expected the uniformed men to greet him. No one was there except the old caretaker that the Nazis had used. He said to the old man, we're starving. Do you have anything to eat? The old man said they took everything. There's nothing. Search for yourself. He searched throughout the whole building, went through every closet, every room. In one closet was this old case. He carried it back to the old man, and the old man said, son, take it. It's from the Jews. The Waffen took it from the Jews and then sent those Jews to the gas chambers. This belonged to the Jews. They've abused it. There were no strings. We had it restrung recently. No strings. They abused it. Since it belonged to the Jews, they kicked it around. It's quite battered. He said, it's yours. John took it back, and the emotional courage and hope was generated And they went out and collected grass and whatever they could find and survived. I was able to acquire it a few years ago, not knowing anything about it except whether it was a genuine Guinereus, as the inside post states. However, as they found as friends of the conservatory in Chicago, it's a reproduction. That's fine. We don't have the first generation of Jews, but we have reproduction of Jews. And while many of them were massacred, the music still echoes through the alleys and the streets and the chambers and the palaces. Many of the great renditions that we enjoy were created by the Jews. I'll bring it home with this note. We love the Jews here. God loved the Jews. We have an entire section dedicated to the fact that Israel is special. We have Jewish lineage sitting in this audience today. A few months ago, a Jewish scientist came from Russia. Pastor Jim, all the way from Russia, he said, I came all this distance basically to speak with you. And as we sat in the conference room and we had lunch together, for the first time in his life, this Russian scientist had peanut butter and jelly. He gave me his name. His name is Nikolai Solomonov. He said, we are not only Jewish, we're direct descendants of King Solomon. And he said, my father is head of one of the large laboratories, science laboratories in Russia. We've been watching you on television for 20 years. It's amazing. And he said, we want you to come and lecture at the 5 largest universities in Russia and to give the creation model that you've been giving on television. What a glorious opportunity. A little dangerous to be in Russia right now. Anyhow, that left hand, he said, we're direct descendants of King Solomon. But yesterday, 2 couples came. One was the preacher who preached the only sermon ever heard in space to the astronauts a few years ago. He's been a personal friend of mine for decades. He and his wife came, his brother, president of the college, came, and the brother's wife. After an hour and a half of demonstrating what was going on in the museum, the wife came to me standing over by the display where we're going momentarily. She said, I just learned recently from a special society with a letter, courier delivered, requiring a signature, that my great-grandfather was a Jewish physician in Europe. When it was learned that he was Jewish, he and his family were imprisoned. Later, they were all permitted to leave except him because he had standing. They didn't want him in the community. Finally, a nobleman became extremely ill. And the only physician around was the Jewish physician. And by the way, for our illness, the only physician able to attend us is a Jewish carpenter. His name is Jesus Christ. So her great-grandfather was permitted to go out of prison, check on the nobleman. He diagnosed his illness, prescribed the remedy, and the nobleman lived. And the Jewish physician was then released at an old age. She said, not only did we learn we're Jewish, but we learned that we're direct descendants of King David. And they came to the museum yesterday. Those illustrations are reasons this is so meaningful, Pastor Jim. We're now going to place beside an ancient Esther scroll describing Haman and his desire to wipe out the entire human race. And Psalm 83:4 states that In the end time, they will try to wipe out the memory of Israel and all the personnel. Through this, it was Hitler who tried to wipe out the Jews. And while he killed personnel, music, kicked around, despised, ridiculed, music still echoes through the alleys and the chambers, in the hallways, in the palaces, and the cockles of our own hearts. We're going to place this violin that belonged to the Jews, symbolizing their survival in spite of Hitler, beside the Esther scroll, stating the survival in spite of all the efforts of a pagan generation. And we want you to be a part of this ceremony. And this is where it will permanently rest.
We need it a little.
Nice.